My father stood by the front door with his arms crossed while my mother looked everywhere except at me. Neither of them seemed upset. They looked relieved. Sutter leaned against the hallway wall with a small smile that told me he had been waiting for this moment. I picked up the garbage bag without saying a word. There was no point arguing. My opinion had never mattered in that house. Before I stepped outside, I looked around one last time. The living room held every childhood memory I had. I remembered doing homework at the old dining table, helping paint the fence every summer, and fixing broken things around the house because my father always expected me to do the work. None of it meant anything now. The front door closed behind me. I stood on the sidewalk with one bag of clothes and less than $40 in my wallet. My old pickup truck had stopped running 2 weeks earlier, so I couldn't even sleep in it. I had nowhere to go. I walked until the neighborhood disappeared behind me. My phone stayed silent. No calls. No messages. Not even a simple question asking if I was safe. As evening came, I found a small bus station and sat on a cold metal bench. People came and went without noticing me. I watched families laughing together, friends greeting each other, couples making travel plans. It felt like I was watching a life that belonged to everyone except me. I counted my money 3 times, hoping the amount would somehow change. It didn't. I bought the cheapest sandwich I could find and saved the rest because I had no idea when I would eat again. The station closed late that night, forcing everyone outside. The air became colder, and I kept walking simply to stay warm. Every motel I passed was too expensive. Every apartment required money I didn't have. Near midnight, I found a small church with a covered entrance. I sat against the wall, pulled my jacket tighter, and tried to get some sleep. Every sound woke me up. Passing cars, barking dogs, footsteps on the sidewalk. I barely rested at all. When the sun finally came up, I felt exhausted, hungry, and scared. For a few minutes, I thought about going back and asking my parents for another chance. Maybe they would let me stay for a few more weeks. Then I remembered the way they looked at me before the door closed. There had been no sadness, no hesitation, and no love. That was the moment I understood something important. No one was coming to save me. If I wanted a future, I would have to build it myself, one day at a time. From that morning forward, every step I took would be my own, and every success would belong to me alone. The weeks turned into months, and I slowly settled into a routine that was more about surviving than living. Some nights I stayed at a shelter when there was an empty bed. Other nights I found a cheap motel if I had earned enough money that week. When I finally got my old pickup running again with help from a mechanic who let me pay him little by little, it became my bedroom whenever money was too tight. I took every job I could find. In the mornings, I washed dishes at a busy diner. The work was fast, hot, and tiring, but I never complained. After finishing there, I headed to a warehouse where I unloaded heavy freight trucks until my back and shoulders ached. Whenever construction companies needed extra hands, I signed up without asking questions. I swept floors, carried lumber, mixed concrete, and cleaned job sites after everyone else had gone home. By the end of each day, my clothes were covered in dirt, grease, or soap, depending on where I had worked. I was always tired, but I reminded myself that being exhausted was better than giving up. I also enrolled in night classes at the local community college. I wanted certifications that could help me earn better jobs in construction. Many evenings I fought to keep my eyes open during class after working since sunrise, but I refused to quit. I knew education was one thing nobody could ever take away from me. Money disappeared almost as quickly as I earned it. Rent, food, gas, and school fees left very little behind. Still, I made sure to save a few dollars whenever possible. Even if it was only $5 or $10, I put it aside. I wanted to build something instead of simply getting through another week. One afternoon at a construction site, I was cleaning up after the crew had finished pouring concrete. Most workers had already left, but I stayed behind to organize the tools without being asked. An older man watched me for a few minutes before walking over. "You always work this hard?" he asked. I looked up and smiled. "Someone has to." He laughed and introduced himself as Leander Cross, the owner of the company managing the project. Instead of leaving, he asked me about my life. I answered honestly. I told him I was trying to learn everything I could because I wanted a better future. He nodded thoughtfully. "Skills can be taught," he said. "Character can't." From that day on, Leander started giving me more responsibilities. He explained why certain building methods worked better than others. He showed me how to read blueprints, estimate costs, and solve problems before they became expensive mistakes. For the first time in my life, someone invested time in me because they believed I was worth it. Every now and then, I heard news about my family through people who still lived in my hometown. My parents continued paying for Sutter's dreams and treating him like he could do no wrong. As far as they were concerned, I no longer existed. It hurt, but I stopped waiting for them to change. My focus was no longer on the family I had lost. It was on the future I was slowly building with my own hands. The next few years passed faster than I expected. My life became busy with work, learning, and finding better opportunities. Every project taught me something new. I paid attention to the smallest details because I wanted to understand every part of the construction business, not just how to build houses, but also how to manage people, control costs, and earn the trust of clients. Leander noticed my progress. He gave me more difficult jobs and trusted me to speak with customers. At first, I was nervous, but I quickly realized that people appreciated honesty more than empty promises. If I said a project would take 6 weeks, I made sure it was finished in 6 weeks. If there was a problem, I told the customer immediately instead of hiding it. That simple approach helped build a strong reputation. From time to time, I heard updates about my family from people who still knew them. I never asked for the information, but news always seemed to find me. Sutter had finished college without worrying about student loans because our parents paid every bill. They also bought him a brand new luxury truck after graduation. Soon after that, they invested a large amount of money to help him start his own home remodeling company. At first, everyone believed he would be successful. But instead of focusing on the business, Sutter cared more about looking successful than actually becoming successful. He rented an expensive office that he didn't need. He spent money on designer clothes, fancy dinners, and anything that made people think he was rich. The business itself received very little attention. When projects fell behind schedule, he blamed his workers. When customers complained, he ignored their calls. When money became tight, he looked to our parents for another check. They always gave it to him. Each time the company struggled, Benton and Deline convinced themselves it was only a temporary problem. They paid his overdue bills, covered missed loan payments, and even borrowed money themselves to keep his company alive. Instead of learning from his mistakes, Sutter simply expected another rescue. I listened to these stories without saying much. Part of me felt sorry for my parents, but another part remembered the night they decided I wasn't worth helping. I had learned that some lessons cannot be taught. People have to face the results of their own choices. Meanwhile, my own future was changing in ways I never imagined. One evening after we finished reviewing plans for a new commercial project, Leander asked me to stay behind. He placed several folders on the table and looked at me with a serious expression. "I've been thinking about this for a long time," he said. "This company has grown because of your work as much as mine." I wasn't sure what he meant. Then he slid the papers toward me. "I want you to become my business partner." For a moment, I couldn't speak. After everything I had been through, someone was offering me a chance that could change the rest of my life. Accepting Leander's offer changed everything. I worked harder than ever because I knew opportunities like this didn't come often. We weren't just building houses anymore. We were building trust, and that became the reason people kept coming back to us. As the years passed, our company grew one project at a time. We never rushed jobs just to make more money. We finished every project the right way, even if it took extra time. Customers noticed the difference. Many of them recommended us to their friends, family, and business partners. Before long, we had more work than we could accept. Leander always reminded me that a good company was built by good people. I never forgot those words. Whenever we hired someone new, I treated them with respect. I remembered what it felt like to be ignored and looked down on. If someone worked hard and wanted to learn, I gave them every chance to succeed. Promotions were earned through effort, not personal favorites. The team became more like a family than a workplace. Several years later, Leander told me he was ready to retire. He had spent most of his life in construction and wanted more time with his wife and grandchildren. Before stepping away, he offered to sell me the company. Buying it was the biggest decision of my life. It wasn't easy, but together with savings, careful planning, and support from the bank, I made it happen. The day the papers were signed, I stood alone in my office for a long time, thinking about how far life had brought me. From there, the business continued growing. We opened offices in neighboring states and took on larger commercial projects. Every expansion was planned carefully. I refused to grow too fast because I had seen what happened when people chase success without discipline. The company became well known for finishing projects on time and standing behind every promise we made. As my income increased, I looked for smart investments instead of expensive toys. I bought office buildings, warehouses, and small shopping centers that produced steady income. Most people had no idea how much I owned because I never felt the need to show off. I still drove reliable vehicles, lived comfortably without being flashy, and focused on making good decisions instead of attracting attention. Sometimes, usually late at night after a long day at work, I remembered that first night outside the church. I could still picture myself sitting on those cold steps with nowhere to go. Those memories never disappeared. Instead of making me angry, they reminded me why I worked so hard. I knew how quickly life could change. I also knew that money could disappear if you became careless. People often asked what motivated me to keep pushing forward after reaching success. The truth was simple. I wasn't trying to prove anyone wrong anymore. I was simply grateful for the life I had built and determined to protect it. Whatever opportunities the future brought, I wanted to be ready. I had learned that life often gives people unexpected chances, but only those who prepare are able to recognize them when they finally arrive. One afternoon, my investment team gathered in the conference room to review several commercial properties that had recently become available. Most of them were office buildings or small retail spaces that banks wanted to sell. We carefully looked through each listing, discussing the risks and possible returns. Near the end of the meeting, one address caught my attention. I looked at it again to make sure I wasn't mistaken. It was the house where I had grown up. For a few seconds, the room around me seemed to disappear. I recognized the street name immediately. I remembered every corner of that neighborhood without needing a map. I quietly asked for more information. One of my team members opened the property file and explained that the owners had fallen far behind on their loan payments. The bank had started foreclosure, and unless the debt was paid soon, the house would be sold at a public auction within a few weeks. I didn't say much during the rest of the meeting. After everyone left, I stayed behind and read every page of the report. It slowly became clear what had happened. Over the years, Benton had borrowed against the house more than once. Each new loan had been used to help Sutter's struggling business survive. Whenever creditors demanded payment, another loan seemed to appear. Instead of fixing the real problems, they kept pushing them into the future. But the future had finally arrived. The debt had grown too large to manage. Sutter had continued making one bad decision after another. He believed every new investment would be the one that saved his company. Instead, each failure left him owing even more money. The bank had finally reached its limit. Without enough income to repay everything, foreclosure became the only option. I couldn't help thinking about how many times my parents had refused to help me when I truly needed it. Yet they had risked everything they owned trying to protect someone who never learned from his mistakes. According to the report, my mother still believed everything would somehow work out. She expected another bank, another lender, or another miracle to appear before the auction date. There wasn't going to be one. Numbers don't care about hope. Missed payments become legal notices. Legal notices become deadlines. Deadlines become auctions. That is simply how the system works. I closed the file and looked out the office window for a long moment. The house had once been presented as Sutter's future. I could still remember hearing that it would belong to him one day while I was told to leave with nothing. Life had a strange way of changing directions. I wasn't looking for revenge, and I felt no satisfaction reading the report. If anything, I felt disappointed. So many years had passed, yet my parents had never stopped making the same mistake. Before leaving for the evening, I asked my assistant to notify me when the auction date was officially confirmed. I didn't explain why. At that moment, I wasn't sure what I would do. I only knew that, after all these years, my past had suddenly found its way back into my future. The day of the auction arrived sooner than I expected. I drove there alone in a simple pickup instead of one of the company vehicle. I didn't want attention, and I certainly didn't want anyone recognizing me before the bidding started. The auction was held in a small county building. A few investors, real estate agents, and bank representatives filled the room. Most of them were there to buy properties they had never seen before. To them, it was just another business deal. To me, it was something completely different. I quietly signed in, found a seat near the back, and waited. When the auction began, several properties were sold first. People raised their bidding cards, prices climbed, and deals were completed within minutes. Then the address I had been waiting for was announced. The room became quiet. The opening price was lower than I expected because the bank mainly wanted to recover its money. A few investors made small bids, hoping to get a bargain. I joined the bidding without showing any emotion. Each time someone increased the price, I calmly raised my card again. I had already decided my limit before walking into the building, and it was far above what anyone else seemed willing to pay. One by one, the other bidders stopped. The auctioneer looked around the room. Going once. A short pause followed. Going twice. No one spoke. Sold. The sound of the wooden hammer echoed through the room. Just like that, it was over. I completed the paperwork with the bank representatives, signed the required documents, and arranged the payment. Everything happened quietly and professionally. By the afternoon, I officially owned the property. There were no celebrations and no feeling of victory. As I drove toward the house later that day, my hands tightened around the steering wheel. I had imagined this moment many times over the years, but standing in front of the house again felt nothing like I expected. The yard looked smaller than I remembered. The paint was faded, and the fence needed repairs. I unlocked the front door with the key provided by the bank. The house was empty. My footsteps echoed through every room. I walked slowly from one end of the house to the other. The living room still had the same large window facing the street. The kitchen looked almost unchanged. Even the hallway seemed frozen in time. Every room brought back another memory. Some were happy, but most reminded me of feeling unwanted, blamed, or ignored. I stood in the bedroom where I had packed my clothes into a garbage bag years earlier. For a long moment, I simply looked around without saying a word. That frightened 18-year-old kid felt very close again. Finally, I walked back outside and locked the front door. Owning the house didn't erase the past. It didn't make the pain disappear, but it did remind me how far I had come. Later that evening, my attorney called to discuss the next legal steps. The law gave me the right to take possession of the property immediately. I told him I wanted everything handled properly. No shortcuts. No surprises. No one would be treated the way I had been treated all those years ago. Whatever happened next, it would happen with fairness, patience, and respect. That decision mattered more to me than owning the house itself. A few days after the paperwork was completed, my attorney called to tell me that Benton and Deline had received the official notice. They now knew the property had been sold to a private buyer. According to him, they immediately asked for a meeting. They wanted to speak directly with the new owner. They hoped they could ask for more time before moving out. I agreed to the meeting, but I asked my attorney not to tell them my name. I wanted everything to happen face to face. The meeting was scheduled in one of the conference rooms at my company's main office. It was a professional setting with nothing personal about it. I arrived early, spoke with my attorney for a few minutes, and waited. Soon the receptionist informed us that they had arrived. I stayed in the hallway until everyone was seated. When I finally opened the door and walked inside, the room became completely silent. My mother looked at me first. Her eyes widened. My father slowly stood from his chair as if he couldn't believe what he was seeing. Neither of them said a word. Sutter looked confused for a second before recognizing me. His face immediately turned red. "You," he shouted. "This has to be some kind of joke." I calmly walked to the other side of the table and took my seat. "No," I answered quietly. "It's not a joke." For several seconds, nobody spoke. Finally, my father broke the silence. "You bought the house?" "Yes," I replied. My mother shook her head over and over. "I don't understand," she whispered. "There isn't much to understand," I said. The property went to a public auction. I attended the auction and placed the winning bid. Sutter slammed his hand on the table. "You did this to embarrass us." I looked directly at him. I bought a property that was legally for sale. Anyone in that auction room could have done the same thing. "You planned this," he yelled. "I reviewed an investment opportunity," I answered calmly. The address happened to be familiar. He wanted to argue more, but my attorney reminded everyone to remain respectful. The room became quiet again. For the first time in my life, I noticed something different about my parents. They no longer looked confident. They looked worried. The certainty they once carried had disappeared. My father cleared his throat. "We've lived there for many years," he said softly. "We're asking if you can give us more time." His voice was nothing like I remembered. Years ago, he had spoken to me with complete authority. Now he sounded uncertain. I listened without interrupting. No one in the room mentioned the night I had been forced to leave, but the memory sat between all of us. Everyone knew it. No one needed to say it out loud. Sutter folded his arms and stared at me with anger. "This is revenge," he muttered. I slowly shook my head. If revenge had been my goal, this meeting would have gone very different. I slid a folder across the table. "My attorney has prepared a legal agreement that gives you additional time to move. Everything is written clearly. No hidden conditions." My parents looked at each other in surprise. I wasn't there to humiliate them. I was there to handle the situation the right way. For the first time, the decisions belonged to me, and I chose fairness over bitterness. After everyone finished reading the agreement, silence filled the room again. My attorney stayed quiet, allowing us to speak without interruption. My father placed the papers on the table and looked at me. "You still blame us for what happened all those years ago," he said. I met his eyes without anger. "I don't blame you anymore," I answered. "But I will never pretend it didn't happen." No one spoke. I took a slow breath before continuing. "You didn't just ask me to leave. You made it clear that I didn't matter. You treated me like I was a problem while giving Sutter everything he wanted." My mother lowered her head. "You never asked how I survived," I said. "You never checked if I had food, a place to sleep, or anyone to help me. You simply moved on with your lives." My father folded his arms. "We did what we thought was best," he replied. "For who?" I asked quietly. He didn't answer. I continued speaking, not because I wanted to hurt them, but because they had never heard the truth from me. Every difficult choice I made after that day came from knowing I couldn't depend on anyone else. I worked because I had no other option. I studied because nobody was paying my way. Everything I built came from necessity, not luck. My mother's eyes filled with tears. I kept telling myself we would fix things someday, she whispered. I looked at her for a moment. Someday became 15 years. She covered her face with her hand. I should have called, she said through tears. I should have found you. No one answered. Across the table, Sutter let out a frustrated laugh. So now everything is my fault. I turned toward him. No. Your choices are your responsibility. The way Mom and Dad treated me is theirs. He shook his head. My business failed because the economy was bad. It wasn't the economy, I replied calmly. It was the decisions you made. He immediately started listing excuses. He blamed unreliable employees. He blamed difficult customers. He blamed banks for refusing more loans. He even blamed bad timing. Everyone had caused his problems except him. My father listened quietly. For the first time, he didn't defend Sutter. He looked tired, older than I remembered. Finally, he spoke in a low voice. We kept believing one more chance would solve everything. I nodded. And every time you gave him another chance, you refused to let him face the consequences. The room became silent again. My mother slowly looked up. We failed you, she whispered. Those words stayed in the air for several seconds. Years ago, I had dreamed of hearing them. Now they didn't change anything. I wasn't waiting for an apology anymore. I had already built the life they said I would never have. Their approval no longer meant success to me because I had already found confidence in my own work, my own decisions, and the people who had believed in me when my own family did not. At that moment, I realized I wasn't carrying the weight of the past anymore. They were. The meeting ended on a much quieter note than it had begun. My attorney gathered the documents and explained every part of the agreement once more. My parents would have enough time to pack their belongings, find another place to live, and leave without being rushed. Everything would be handled legally and respectfully. My father looked at me for a long moment. You didn't have to do this, he said. I know, I replied. He nodded slowly but said nothing else. As everyone stood up, Sutter pushed his chair back with frustration. So that's it, he said. You're just going to throw us away like we're nothing. I looked at him calmly. No, I answered. I'm giving Mom and Dad time that I was never given. His face tightened. What about me? He asked. What about you? I replied. My business is gone. I have debts everywhere. You have more than enough money to fix this. I shook my head. I won't. He stared at me in disbelief. You can afford it. That doesn't mean I should. He took a step closer. You're my brother. And I always will be, I said. But being your brother doesn't mean protecting you from every decision you make. He opened his mouth to argue again, but I continued before he could speak. I didn't create your problems, Sutter. I won't solve them either. For the first time, he had no answer. My mother quietly wiped her eyes. She looked at Sutter and then back at me. I think we've been protecting him for too long, she said softly. Sutter turned toward her. You can't be serious. She didn't respond. My father placed a hand on Sutter's shoulder. No more, he said. Sutter looked shocked. You've never said that before. I should have, Benton admitted. The words seemed difficult for him to say, but they were honest. He finally understood that helping someone isn't always the same as rescuing them. Sometimes rescuing a person over and over only keeps them from growing. I picked up my jacket and prepared to leave. Before I reached the door, my mother called my name. I stopped and turned around. I don't expect you to forget what happened, she said quietly. But thank you for showing us kindness when we didn't deserve it. I gave a small nod. This isn't about forgetting. She waited for me to continue. I've forgiven you because I don't want to carry anger for the rest of my life. But forgiveness doesn't erase responsibility. We all have to live with the choices we've made. No one argued with that. As I walked out of the building, I felt lighter than I had in years. I wasn't walking away because I had won. I was walking away because the past no longer controlled my future. Behind me, my parents were beginning a much simpler life than the one they once imagined. They finally understood that the son they had pushed aside had become the strongest person in the family. Not because they had opened doors for me, but because they had closed every one of them, forcing me to build my own. Several years passed, and life continued moving forward. The old house remained in good condition, but I knew I didn't want to live there. Too many memories belonged inside those walls. Instead of selling it, I spent a long time thinking about what the property could become. One day, the answer became clear. I decided to turn it into a community learning center. The house was completely renovated. We repaired the roof, updated every room, and added classrooms and workshop space. The backyard was redesigned into an outdoor training area where young people could practice basic construction skills. When the work was finished, the place looked completely different. More importantly, it felt different. The center welcomed young adults who had grown up without stable families or who had recently left foster care. Many of them had nowhere to go and no clear direction, just as I once had. We offered free training in construction, electrical work, plumbing, painting, and other skilled trades. Experienced workers from my company volunteered to teach classes after work. We also helped students prepare for job interviews, write resumes, and learn how to manage their finances. The goal was simple: give people the opportunity that someone once gave me. Every time I visited the center, I met young men and women who reminded me of myself at 18. They weren't looking for sympathy. They were looking for a chance. Watching them grow in confidence became one of the most rewarding experiences of my life. Some students found jobs with my company. Others started successful careers with different businesses. A few even returned later as instructors, helping the next group of young people begin their own journeys. The building that had once represented rejection slowly became a place filled with hope. As for my parents, they moved into a small apartment across town. They lived quietly and stayed within their means. We spoke occasionally, usually during holidays or family events. Our relationship never became close, but it became respectful. Time couldn't erase the past. It could only teach us to live with it. Sutter had a much harder road. Without anyone solving his problems anymore, he had to rebuild his life from the beginning. He found steady work, paid off his debts little by little, and slowly accepted responsibility for the choices that had brought him there. It wasn't easy, but for the first time, he was standing on his own feet. One evening, I stood outside the learning center as the last students walked to their cars after class. The sun was beginning to set, and laughter filled the parking lot. I looked at the house one more time. Years earlier, I had left that property carrying nothing but a garbage bag and uncertainty. Now it was helping others build futures they once believed were impossible. In that moment, I understood something that had taken me years to learn. The greatest victory was never buying back the house. The greatest victory was becoming the kind of man who could turn a place filled with painful memories into a place where hope could begin again. That frightened 18-year-old who once stood alone on the sidewalk had finally become the owner of something far more valuable than a house. He had built a future that no one believed he could, and through that future, he gave countless others the chance to build their own.